Yeah, cause like and I also don't wanna come off like, "Oh, I'm just shitting on like, yeah, I'm obviously very critical of tribal leaders, but, like, I say this to hopefully get people to come to the conclusion that, like, well, maybe we do have more power than we think, and I think tribes like yours and like mine probably have the most power because of our location, because of our proximity to critical US military infrastructure. And they know that. And we are the last people that they want to feel empowered because the second we are, we can cause very serious and real damage to the settler machine, to the settler colonial infrastructure, to the machine, ideologically and physically, right? And I think tribal leaders, to some extent, probably understand that too, and they know that that's scary, and people should take seriously what that means and the implications for it. But they should also have the courage to imagine a future in which that power can literally free us, and not just us, literally everybody else, including non-human relatives, right? Including like right the animal relatives who can't migrate the way they used to, and including the animal and plant relatives who can't grow in irradiated sites on my land, right? Like they know that we hold a lot of power, and I think our tribal leaders need to realize that too. I think they are to some extent afraid of their own power, and like I'm critical of tribal leaders in this way, and I'm sure you are too. Not to just put them down, but to hopefully inspire people to think differently or to think about a bigger picture, right? Because so often, organizations like yours or like mine and plenty of others, they represent the people of these nations, right? In doing like solidarity work, in pushing back against extractive industries and things like that. And they don't always represent what the tribal government is doing. But what if we could all be on the same page? What if the tribal governments did really push and support these fights? And what if multiple tribal governments did? And what if there was regional support for these things? And what if they became popular movements? And what if there was legislation being put out? And like that is what I'm getting at when I'm making these critiques of tribal leadership. And like I said, I'm sure it's similar for you too. We're not shitting on them for the sake of shitting on them. Like we envision greater things, and like my only wish is to inspire and empower people enough to envision these bigger things as well.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And obviously, people around our generation, they want us to speak up more and do things and understand the way things are. And when we have these platforms and things of organizing, those are ways of how we're trying to voice our opinions. Um, so I think it's a big a strength of courage that what it takes what we're doing on these different platforms, whether it's physically being on episodes and things that are voicing our opinion, and how we can envision a better future for our next generation. I think what we always come back in on is like, yeah, like, well, what are you doing? What are you doing to help support and all these other things? This is we're doing this. We're doing actions. We're doing educational groups. We're organizing in different spaces, and I think that's just overlooked all the time. We have people of our generation, of our age groups, doing a lot more and being involved a lot more than there ever was, especially when it comes to stuff going on globally, being very consciously aware about what's going on in your backyard, and then also remembering that there are relatives that deal with similar situations and deal with similar impacts across the globe. And I think that's what always gets kind of lost in a lot of conversations with tribal leaders, is because they think, well, we're just being rowdy or whatever, but without sitting down and actually listening and having a conversation. I think that just relates to even like with my son. We're arguing, but do we ever sit down and have an actual conversation and talk about what we're moving towards, and working through these problems. So when I think about, like you mentioned, the what if we were on the same page? I think that is definitely has definitely been an interesting conversation, because one of the things is like we could, and then there are others who believe that we could to a certain point, to a certain extent. I think there should be boundaries set, um, just because of the ways that we do things. Um, I think that's it's interesting. Um, yeah, yeah. Let's all be on one particular ideology, one understanding of what we're wanting to get towards, and then others will be like, well, I think we should set boundaries. Tribal government, don't obviously represent the entire people. So I think that's where the boundaries could be, is where we have an understanding, and here's what we're going at it, and here's where we need support, and vice versa. Because I think that there's, just because of the the way that it's set up right now, I think that there nearly is not as much support around certain tactics and strategies versus other tactics and strategies. So I think that can, but as long as that there's that sort of interconnected ways of just not being through one aid, but through other ways too, that where it really can impact um, a lot of people's, at least giving people hope, people understanding um, of where we're coming from. Um, and so I think that that's a big part of it, because with the question about, well, what is a border, no border look like? What is that? What does that entail? And it goes back to that. Well, if we have tribal governments taking leadership, you know, we also need community. We also need um, actions. We also need people who can be able to be on frontline support. We need a lot of that people have already built, and have a critique about where we can go from that. It's not just, okay, yeah, we're taking care of our relatives, but what are we doing to protect a lot of ourselves and our relatives, and continuously work towards that? And that's where grassroots organizations have always been so impactful, because they understand what it's like to be in that situation, and also getting out of that situation, and helping others who are under the some sort of same scope of what it's like. Um, you know, being arrested, people. The simplest way of an example, people being on those front lines that are able to teach others about, what is their humanity, and what it's like when people cross those boundaries. So I think there's a lot that we can work towards, as far as like with tribal governments and grassroots organizations, and if they're willing to listen. And I think that's where another big part of where we can sort of voice a lot of our change, and whether we if they listen or not, we still do what we got to do. We still do it. So yeah.